The new owners called me 3 days after closing. There's something carved into the basement wall you need to see. I drove over immediately. Scratched into the concrete, barely visible were the words, 1982, Marie held here. Help! Marie was my aunt. She disappeared and everyone said she ran away. But she never left that house. She was hidden in our basement. And my father knew. Before I tell you what really happened to my Aunt Marie, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story makes you question what secrets might be hiding in your own family's past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will shake you to your core. My name is Katherine Anderson, and I'm 68 years old. This story begins with a house sale and ends with a truth so dark, I'm still trying to process it 3 months later. The house at 2047 Oakwood Drive in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was my childhood home. My parents bought it in 1960 for $12,000, a small two-story with a basement, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a backyard just big enough for a swing set. It was a working-class neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, where front doors stayed unlocked and kids played in the street until the streetlights came on. I grew up in that house. My brother Danny and I shared the upstairs bedroom. My parents slept in the master bedroom on the first floor. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floors, exposed beams, a furnace in the corner, boxes of old belongings stacked against the walls. We rarely went down there except to do laundry or fetch the Christmas decoration. My father, Robert Mitchell, worked at the steel mill for 40 years. He was a quiet man, stern, the type who showed love through discipline rather than affection. My mother, Dorothy Mitchell, was a homemaker who kept the house spotless and cooked 3 meals a day without complaint. They were good parents by the standards of their generation. They provided for us. They kept us safe. They raised us to be responsible adults. Or so I thought. My father died 5 years ago, at the age of 92. My mother followed him 2 years later, at 88. After Mom died, Danny and I inherited the house. Neither of us wanted to live there. Danny had moved to Florida decades ago, and I had my own home across town with my husband. So we decided to sell it. The housing market was hot. We listed it for $185,000, and within 2 weeks we had multiple offers. A young couple, Mark and Jennifer Harrison, both in their early 30s with a baby on the way, offered asking price, cash deal, quick closing. We accepted immediately. I spent a month cleaning out the house, sorting through 60 years of accumulated belongings. I found my old report cards in the attic, my brother's baseball trophies, my mother's wedding dress carefully preserved in a garment bag. I found boxes of photographs, old tax returns, receipts from purchases made decades ago. My parents had kept everything. The basement was the last place I tackled. It was damp and musty, filled with broken furniture, old paint cans, tools my father had collected over the years. I hired a junk removal service to haul most of it away. I didn't look too closely at the walls or the floor. I just wanted to empty the space and be done with it. The closing happened on a Tuesday in October. Mark and Jennifer were excited, talking about their renovation plans. They wanted to finish the basement, update the kitchen, turn the 3rd bedroom into a nursery. I handed them the keys, signed the final papers, and drove away without looking back. 3 days later, on Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Anderson, this is Mark Harrison. We just closed on your parents' house. Yes, of course. Is everything okay? Did something break already? There was a pause. Miss Anderson, we started the basement renovation this morning. We're planning to finish it, turn it into a family room. Our contractor was examining the walls, checking for moisture and cracks, and he found something disturbing. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? There were words carved into the concrete wall, old words. They're hard to see, they've been painted over multiple times, but when we stripped the paint, they were there. Mrs. Anderson, they say someone was held in that basement, against their will. The contractor thinks we should call the police. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'll be right there. I drove to Oakwood Drive in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, words carved into the basement wall, someone held there, against their will. I knew what they'd found, or rather I knew whose words they'd found. Marie, my Aunt Marie, my father's younger sister, the woman who disappeared in 1982 and was never seen again. When I arrived at the house, Mark and Jennifer were standing in the driveway with their contractor, a middle-aged man named Tom, who looked pale and shaken. The basement door was open, work lights illuminating the concrete stairs leading down. Mrs. Anderson, Mark said carefully, before we go down there, I need to ask you something. Did you know about this? Did you know there were messages carved into the wall? No, I said honestly. I had no idea, but I think I know whose messages they are. We went down to the basement together. The contractor had stripped large sections of the wall, where the old paint had been covering the concrete, and there, scratched into the gray surface with what must have been a nail or a piece of metal, were words, dozens of lines of text, some barely legible, some clear enough to read easily. The first message, at the top, was dated June 15, 1982. Marie Mitchell held here. Robert knows. Help me. Below that, day 3, he brings food at night, says it's for my own good, says the hospital will kill me. I don't believe him. And then day 7, Dorothy knows. She brought me a blanket. She's scared of him. We're both trapped. The messages continued down the wall, dated sporadically, becoming more desperate. Day 15, I hear them upstairs, eating dinner, watching TV, living their lives while I'm down here in the dark. The children don't know. Catherine and Danny have no idea I'm 15 feet below them. Day 23, I tried to escape when he opened the door to bring food. He caught me. He's stronger than he looks. He says I'll thank him someday. He says he's saving my life. Day 31, I've stopped fighting. I just want to go home. I promise I'll be good. I promise I'll take the medication. Please let me go home. Day 45, he says it's almost over. Says they'll stop looking soon. Says I can come upstairs once the police give up the search. The final message, at the bottom of the wall, was dated September 8. He's moving me tonight. Says it's not safe here anymore. Says he found a better place. I'm scared. What if the better place is worse? What if I never? The message ended abruptly. The word unfinished. I stood in that basement, reading and rereading those carved words, and my entire understanding of my childhood collapsed. My Aunt Marie, hidden in our basement, for 3 months in 1982, while my family lived upstairs, eating dinner, watching television, sleeping peacefully, while I did my homework, and played with my friends, and complained about my teenage problems, while a woman was imprisoned 15 feet below me, carving desperate messages into concrete walls that no one would see for 43 years. Mrs. Anderson, Mark's voice was gentle. Who is Marie Mitchell? My aunt, I whispered. My father's sister. She disappeared in 1982. Everyone thought she ran away from the psychiatric hospital where she was staying. The police searched for months. They never found her. Your father's sister, Mark repeated slowly. And according to these messages, your father was the one holding her here. I nodded, unable to speak. We need to call the police. Tom the contractor said, this is evidence of a crime, kidnapping, false imprisonment, maybe worse. She disappeared 43 years ago, I said. My father's been dead for 5 years. Whatever happened, everyone involved is gone now. But don't you want to know the truth? Jennifer asked softly. Don't you want to know what happened to her, where he moved her, whether she survived? Of course I wanted to know. The question was whether I could handle the truth. We called the police. 2 officers arrived within 30 minutes, a younger man and an older woman who introduced themselves as officers Martinez and Chen. They photographed the wall, took statements from all of us, and asked me questions about my father, my mother and Aunt Marie. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. Marie had been my father's younger sister. She'd always been different, what they called troubled back then, what we'd probably recognize as mental illness now. She'd had episodes throughout her 20s, periods of paranoia and delusion. In 1981, she'd had a severe breakdown and was admitted to Mayview State Hospital, a psychiatric institution about 20 miles from Pittsburgh. She'd been there for almost a year when she disappeared in June. The hospital reported her missing. They said she'd walked away during outdoor recreation time and never came back. The police investigated. They searched the hospital grounds, the surrounding woods, the nearby neighborhoods. They interviewed patients and staff. They found nothing. My father had been devastated, or so it seemed. He'd organized search parties, posted flyers, called the police every week for updates. After 6 months with no leads, the police declared her case cold. Everyone assumed she'd either died somewhere in the wilderness or managed to start a new life under a different identity. My father never stopped looking for her. Even years later, he'd mention her occasionally, wondering if she was still alive, hoping she was happy wherever she was, saying he wished he'd protected her better. It was all a lie. He'd known exactly where she was, because he'd been the one hiding her. Officer Chen asked the question I'd been dreading. Mrs. Anderson, did you notice anything unusual in the summer of 1982? Anything that might have indicated someone was living in your basement? I thought back to that summer. I'd been 24 years old, newly married, visiting my parents regularly, but not living at home anymore. My brother Danny was 22, away at college. I don't remember anything unusual, I said slowly, but I wasn't living there anymore. I'd visit for Sunday dinners, holidays. I didn't go down to the basement much when I visited. What about your mother? Did she ever say anything, show any signs of knowing? I remembered the messages on the wall. Dorothy knows. She brought me a blanket. She's scared of him. My mother never said a word, I whispered. Not in 43 years. She went to her grave, keeping this secret. The police opened an investigation. Cold case detectives got involved. They brought in forensic specialists to examine the basement for evidence. They searched through old records, looking for any clue about what happened to Marie after September 1982. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those scratched words in my mind. The children don't know. Catherine and Danny have no idea I'm 15 feet below them. She'd been right. I'd had no idea, but should I have known? Should I have noticed something was wrong? I started going through my old journals from 1982. I'd been keeping a diary since I was 12, and I'd saved them all. I found the journal from that year and started reading. June 16, 1982. Dad seems really upset. Aunt Marie ran away from the hospital yesterday. The police are looking for her. Mom made Dad's favorite dinner to cheer him up. He barely ate anything. I hope they find Marie soon. June 23, 1982. Visited Mom and Dad for Sunday dinner. Dad's still upset about Marie. He's been going down to the basement a lot, organizing things. He says staying busy helps him not think about it. Mom seems nervous. She dropped a plate during dinner and started crying. She said she's just worried about Marie. July 4th, 1982. 4th of July party at Mom and Dad's. Danny came home from college. We had a barbecue in the backyard. Dad seemed distracted. He kept going inside, saying he needed to check on something. When I asked what, he said he thought he heard the furnace making a weird noise. But it's July, why would the furnace be running? I stopped reading. July 4th, Marie had been in the basement for 19 days by then. We'd been having a barbecue right above her, laughing and eating hot dogs and watching fireworks, while she was trapped below us in the dark, the furnace making noise. That's what my father had said. But it wasn't the furnace, it was Marie, trying to make noise, trying to signal that she was there. And I'd accepted his explanation, without question. I kept reading through the journal entry. August 12, 1982. Something weird happened today. I stopped by Mom and Dad's to drop off some tomatoes from our garden. No one answered the front door, but Dad's truck was in the driveway. I went around to the back and saw Dad coming up from the basement, locking the door behind him. When he saw me, he looked startled, almost angry. He said he'd been fixing the water heater and didn't hear me knock, but he was carrying a plate of food. When I asked about it, he said he'd been eating lunch in the basement while he worked. Who does that? It was so strange. August 12th. That was day 57 of Marie's captivity. The plate of food I'd seen, that was for her. My father had been in the middle of bringing her a meal when I'd showed up unexpectedly, and I'd thought it was strange for about 5 seconds before letting it go and moving on with my day. September 20, 1982. Mom called me crying tonight. She said Marie is really gone, said we need to accept it and move on, said holding on to hope is too painful. I tried to comfort her, but she just kept crying and saying forgive me over and over. I thought she meant forgive her for giving up hope. Now I wonder what she was really asking forgiveness for. September 20th, 2 days after the last message on the wall, 2 days after my father moved Marie to this mysterious better place. My mother had called me crying, begging for forgiveness. She'd known Marie was in the basement. She'd known my father had moved her, and she'd never said a word. I called my brother Danny, in Florida, and told him everything. He was silent for a long time after I finished. I don't believe it, he said finally. Dad wouldn't do that. He loved Marie. He spent months looking for her. Danny, I saw the messages. I read her words carved into the concrete. She was there, in our basement, for 3 months. Then someone else carved those messages. Someone trying to make Dad look bad. Who would do that? And why wait 43 years for someone to find them? He didn't have an answer. He didn't want to have an answer. Because accepting the truth meant accepting that our father, the man who'd raised us, who'd taught us right from wrong, who'd been the moral center of our family, had committed a terrible crime. The police investigation continued. They interviewed people who'd known Marie, staff members from Mayview State Hospital, who were still alive, neighbors who'd lived on Oakwood Drive, and they searched property records to see if my father had owned any other buildings or land where he might have moved Marie after the basement became too risky. They found nothing. My father had only ever owned the house on Oakwood Drive. He'd never rented any other property. He'd never bought land. Wherever he'd moved Marie in September 1982, it left no paper trail. 3 weeks into the investigation, Detective Sarah Walsh, the lead investigator on Marie's cold case, called me to her office. She had something to show me. Miss Anderson, we've been going through old records from Mayview State Hospital, trying to understand why your aunt was there, and why your father might have taken her. We found her medical file. I think you need to read it. She handed me a thick folder. Inside were pages and pages of psychiatric evaluations, medication records, incident reports. I started reading. Marie Mitchell had first been admitted to Mayview in March 1981, after what the doctors called a severe psychotic episode. She'd been found wandering the streets of Pittsburgh in the middle of the night, convinced that people were following her, trying to hurt her. She'd attacked a police officer who tried to help her, screaming that he was part of the conspiracy. At Mayview, she'd been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The doctors had tried various medications, but nothing worked well. She'd had violent outbursts. She'd attacked staff members. She'd tried to escape multiple times. The hospital had started discussing more aggressive interventions, electroshock therapy, possibly a lobotomy, if nothing else worked. A lobotomy. In 1982, they were still performing lobotomies on psychiatric patients. I found a note in the file from May 1982, 1 month before Marie's disappearance. It was from her primary psychiatrist, Dr. Gerald Morrison. Patient continues to be highly agitated and resistant to treatment. Multiple medications have failed to manage symptoms. Patient has expressed suicidal ideation and has made 2 attempts to harm herself. Recommend proceeding with electroconvulsive therapy as soon as family consent is obtained. If ECT fails, surgical intervention may be necessary. Surgical intervention. They meant lobotomy. They were planning to either shock her brain with electricity or cut into it with a scalpel. There was another document dated June 10, 1982, 5 days before Marie disappeared from the hospital. It was a consent form for electroshock therapy, signed by Robert Mitchell, her legal guardian. My father had signed the form. He'd authorized them to shock Marie's brain with electricity, and then 5 days later, Marie had vanished from the hospital. Do you see what I'm seeing? Detective Walsh asked gently. I nodded slowly. He took her to protect her. He thought the hospital was going to hurt her, maybe kill her. That's my theory. Your father believed he was saving his sister from experimental psychiatric procedures, so he helped her escape from the hospital and hid her in his basement until he could figure out a more permanent solution. But it wasn't escape if she was held against her will. The messages on the wall, she was begging for help. She said she was being held there. I know, that's where it gets complicated. I think your father genuinely believed he was helping her, but Marie didn't see it that way. To her, she'd been taken from one prison and put into another. I thought about the messages again. He says the hospital will kill me. I don't believe him. Marie hadn't believed she was in danger at the hospital. She'd thought my father was the dangerous one. There's something else, Detective Walsh said. We found records of a phone call made from your parents' house to Mayview Hospital on September 19, 1982, the day after the last message on the basement wall. The call was made at 2:47 a.m. and lasted 6 minutes. What does that mean? We don't know for sure, but our theory is that something happened that night, something that made your father panic. Maybe Marie got worse. Maybe she got violent. Maybe she got sick. Whatever it was, he called the hospital in the middle of the night. Did they have a record of what was said? No. But we spoke to one of the night shift nurses who was working that night. She's 81 now, but she remembers that call. She said a man called asking about what would happen if a patient who'd been off medication for months suddenly started having seizures. The nurse told him to call 911 immediately and get the patient to an emergency room. The man hung up. Seizures. Marie had been having seizures. Schizophrenia medication withdrawal can cause seizures, Detective Walsh explained. Your father took Marie off her medication when he hid her in the basement. He thought the medication was harmful, but going cold turkey after months of treatment can cause serious complications, seizures, stroke, even death. Are you saying my father killed her? I'm saying something happened that night that made him move her out of the basement in a panic, and we have no record of her receiving medical treatment anywhere. No hospital admits, no emergency room visits, nothing. So where did he take her? Detective Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mrs. Anderson, we'd like your permission to search your parents' property for human remains. The words hit me like a physical blow. Human remains. They thought Marie was dead. They thought my father had buried her somewhere on the property. You think he killed her and buried her in the backyard? We think she may have died from complications of medication withdrawal, and your father, panicking, buried her body rather than face questions about why he'd been hiding her. It would explain why she was never found, why there's no record of her after September 1982. I gave them permission to search. What else could I do? The excavation took 3 days. Police brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a team of forensic anthropologists. They searched the backyard, the area around the foundation, even the crawl space under the front porch. They found nothing. No human remains. No evidence that anyone had been buried on the property. "Where is she?" I asked Detective Walsh after they'd finished searching. "If she's not buried here, where did he take her?" "I don't know, Mrs. Anderson. I'm sorry. Without more evidence, we may never know what happened to Marie after September 18th. I started going through my father's belongings, boxes of his things that I'd stored in my own basement after he died, his old work files, his tax returns, his personal papers. I was looking for anything that might tell me where he'd taken Marie, what he'd done with her. I found his journal 3 weeks later. It was hidden at the bottom of a box marked Old Tools, a leather-bound notebook filled with my father's careful handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands and started reading. June 14, 1982. I did it. I got Marie out of that place. The hospital was going to destroy her brain with electricity. They said it was treatment. I call it torture. I couldn't let them do it. So I helped her escape during outdoor time. She thought I was taking her home. Instead, I brought her to my basement. It's temporary, just until I figure out a better plan. She's angry with me. She doesn't understand that I'm saving her life. But she will. Eventually, she'll thank me. June 20, 1982. It's been a week. Marie is getting worse, not better. She screams sometimes. I have to keep the basement door locked so the neighbors don't hear. Dorothy is terrified. She wants me to take Marie back to the hospital, but I can't. They'll punish her for running away. They'll do even worse things to her brain. I'm doing the right thing. I have to believe I'm doing the right thing. July 3, 1982. The police came by today asking about Marie. Routine check, they said. They're interviewing all family members. I told them I haven't seen her since she disappeared. Dorothy was shaking the whole time. After they left, she begged me to tell the truth. I told her if she says anything to anyone, I'll tell the police she helped plan Marie's escape. We're in this together now. August 15, 1982. Marie carved messages into the basement wall. I found them today. She's asking for help. She thinks I'm holding her prisoner. She doesn't understand that this is the only way to keep her safe. I painted over the messages, but I can still see them through the paint. I can't erase them completely. Maybe they should stay there. Maybe someday someone will find them and understand what I tried to do. September 18, 1982. Marie had a seizure tonight. A bad one. She stopped breathing for almost a minute. I called the hospital, but I couldn't tell them the truth. What would I say? That I've been hiding my sister in my basement for 3 months. They'd arrest me. They'd put her back in that place. When she came to, she was different, confused, scared. She didn't recognize me. She asked where she was. I realized then that I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd taken her off all her medication. I thought the medication was poison, but without it her brain was shutting down. I have to move her. The basement isn't safe anymore. If she has another seizure, if something worse happens, I need to be able to get her medical help without exposing what I've done. I know a place, a cabin in the woods that belonged to Dorothy's uncle. He died last year and left it to her family. It's remote, no neighbor, no one will find her there. And if something happens, I can call for help and say I just found her, that she's been living there as a squatter. Tomorrow night, I'll move her. God forgive me. I thought I was saving her. I think I'm killing her. September 19, 1982. It's done. I moved Marie to the cabin last night. It took 2 hours to drive there. The cabin is deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. She was barely conscious, The seizure damaged something in her brain. She's not speaking anymore. She just stares at nothing. I left her with blankets, food, water, and her medication. I'm going to go back in a few days, see if she's improving. I told Dorothy what I did. She cried for hours. She said I should call the police, tell them where Marie is, face the consequences, but I can't. If I do that, Marie goes back to the hospital. They'll shock her brain. They'll turn her into a vegetable. I can't let that happen. I'll take care of her at the cabin. I'll bring her food and medication. I'll visit her every week. She'll get better. She has to get better. September 25, 1982. I went back to the cabin today. Marie was gone. The food I left was untouched. The blankets were still folded where I'd left them. The medication bottles were full. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. Nothing to indicate what happened. She just vanished. I searched the woods for hours, called her name until my voice was hoarse, found nothing. It's like she disappeared into thin air. I don't know if she wandered off and got lost. I don't know if she died out there in the woods. I don't know if someone found her and took her somewhere. I don't know anything. Dorothy says this is my punishment for playing God. She says I should tell the police everything. But what would I tell them? That I kidnapped my sister, held her in my basement, and then abandoned her in a remote cabin where she vanished. They'd put me in prison, and Marie would still be gone. So I'll keep searching. I'll go back to the cabin every weekend. I'll search those woods until I find her, or until I know for certain she's dead. This is my burden to carry, mine alone. The journal entries continued for years. Every weekend, my father drove to the cabin and searched the surrounding woods. He never found any trace of Marie. No body, no belongings, no signs that she'd ever been there. The last entry was from January 2015, just months before he died. It's been 33 years since Marie disappeared from the cabin. I'm 87 years old now. Too old to keep searching. Too old to make the drive. Too old to hike through those woods. I never found her. I never learned what happened to her. I saved her from the hospital, but I couldn't save her from whatever took her in those woods. Dorothy died believing I was a monster. Maybe she was right. I told myself I was protecting Marie. But the truth is, I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake, too afraid to face the consequences of my actions. So I let my sister disappear into the wilderness, and I spent 33 years lying about it. The messages she carved in the basement wall are still there, under all the paint. Someday someone will find them. Someday the truth will come out. And I hope whoever finds those messages understands that I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was saving her. But good intentions don't matter when the outcome is tragedy. Marie is gone, and it's my fault. I sat in my basement, holding my father's journal and cried for hours. For Marie, for my father, for my mother who'd carried this secret to her grave, for the family I thought I knew, but never really understood. The cabin. My father had taken Marie to a cabin in the woods. I called Detective Walsh immediately and told her what I'd found. Do you know where this cabin is? She asked. My father mentioned it belonged to my mother's uncle. I think I know who he means. Uncle Frank Novak. He died in 1981, but I have no idea where the cabin was. My mother never talked about it. We'll search property records for Frank Novak. If he owned a cabin, there will be a deed somewhere. It took the police 2 weeks to find it. Uncle Frank had owned a small hunting cabin on 40 acres of forested land in Clearfield County, about 90 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. The property had passed to my mother when Frank died, but she'd never sold it or developed it. It had just sat there in the woods, forgotten for over 40 years. The police organized a search party. They brought in cadaver dogs, forensic teams, and search and rescue volunteers. I insisted on going with them. The drive took 2 hours on increasingly narrow roads. The final mile was just a dirt path barely wide enough for one vehicle. The cabin itself was a small wooden structure, maybe 400 square feet, with a rusted metal roof and broken window. It looked like it hadn't been occupied in decades. The cadaver dogs alerted immediately when they approached the cabin. There were human remains nearby. The forensic team found her 2 days later, about 200 yards from the cabin, deep in the woods. Skeletal remains, partially buried under decades of leaves and forest debris. The bones were intact enough to make an identification through dental records. It was Marie. She'd been there the whole time, less than a quarter-mile from the cabin where my father had left her. The medical examiner's report concluded she'd died of exposure and dehydration within days of being left at the cabin. In her confused post-seizure state, she'd wandered away from the shelter and gotten lost in the woods. She'd probably died alone, cold and terrified, not understanding where she was or why she'd been abandoned there. My father had searched those woods every weekend for years. He'd walked past her remains countless times without knowing how close he was. Marie Mitchell was finally laid to rest in November 2025, 43 years after she disappeared. We held a funeral at the same church where my parents' funerals had been held. About 20 people attended, mostly distant relatives, and a few people who remembered Marie from before she got sick. I gave the eulogy. I talked about who Marie had been before mental illness took over her life. A talented artist, a voracious reader, someone who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. I talked about how she'd been failed by the psychiatric system of her time, by doctors who saw mental illness as something to be controlled and suppressed rather than treated with compassion. And I talked about how my father, in trying to save her from that system, had made a series of choices that ultimately led to her death. My father thought he was protecting her, I said to the small gathering. He genuinely believed the hospital was going to harm her, and he couldn't stand by and let that happen. So he took her, he hid her. He thought he was giving her a chance at a better life. But good intentions without wisdom can lead to tragedy. My father's love for his sister was real, but love alone wasn't enough. Sometimes love needs to be paired with humility, the humility to admit when you're wrong, to ask for help, to let others with more expertise take over. My father couldn't do that. His pride, his certainty that he alone knew what was best, led to catastrophe. My Aunt Marie died alone in the woods because the person who claimed to be saving her couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. After the funeral, I sold the cabin property. I couldn't bear to keep it. The new owners planned to tear down the old cabin and build a small retreat center for mental health patients, a place where people struggling with mental illness can find peace and proper treatment. They're going to name it Marie's house. It seems fitting. The house on Oakwood Drive, the house where Marie had been held in the basement, now belongs to Mark and Jennifer Harrison. They finished their renovation. They turned the basement into a beautiful family room with new flooring, fresh paint, and warm lighting. But they left one section of the original concrete wall exposed, preserved behind a sheet of plexiglass. Marie's carved messages are still visible there, a permanent reminder of what happened in that space. Jennifer sent me a photo of the finished room. In the image, their baby daughter is playing on a soft rug, laughing at something off camera. Above her, protected behind clear plastic, are the words, "Catherine and Danny have no idea I'm 15 feet below them." We decided to keep the messages visible, Jennifer wrote in her text, not to be morbid, but as a reminder that every house has a history, that secrets have a way of coming out eventually, that the truth always matters, even when it's painful. Our daughter will grow up in this house, and someday when she's old enough, we'll tell her about Marie. We'll tell her that sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters under the bed. They're the secrets hidden in the walls. I'm 68 years old. I thought I knew my family's story. I thought I understood who my parents were, what they stood for, what they'd done with their lives. I was wrong. My father wasn't the stern but loving man I'd always believed him to be. He was a man capable of kidnapping his own sister, holding her prisoner in a basement, and then abandoning her in the wilderness where she died alone and afraid. My mother wasn't the quiet, devoted wife who supported her husband through everything. She was a woman who knew about a terrible crime and stayed silent about it for 43 years, even as Marie's family and friends searched desperately for answers. And I wasn't the observant, caring daughter I thought I was. I was someone who walked past a locked basement door every week without wondering what was behind it. Someone who saw my father carrying plates of food down to the basement and accepted his flimsy excuse without question. Someone who lived 15 feet above the imprisoned woman and never suspected a thing. The guilt is overwhelming some days. I know, logically, that I couldn't have known. I was 24 years old, focused on my own new marriage and my own life. The basement door was always locked. My father was always careful. There were no obvious signs. But still, I eat breakfast now and think about how I used to eat breakfast at my parents' house, chatting about mundane things while Marie was scratching messages into concrete below me. I watched television and remember watching TV in my parents' living room while Marie was trapped in darkness beneath us. I live my normal life and can't escape the knowledge that my normal life was built on top of someone else's night. My brother Danny still refuses to fully accept what happened. He's read the journal. He's seen the messages on the basement wall. He knows intellectually that it's all true, but emotionally, he can't reconcile the father we knew with the man who did these things. He was trying to help her, Danny said the last time we talked. You read the journal. He thought the hospital was going to destroy her brain with electroshock therapy. He was protecting her. He kidnapped her, I said. He held her against her will. He took her off her medication without medical supervision, and it caused her to have seizures. He abandoned her in a remote cabin where she died of exposure. Danny, good intentions don't erase those facts. What was he supposed to do? Let them give her a lobotomy? In 1982, they were still doing lobotomies on psychiatric patients. Did you know that? They'd stick an ice pick through your eye socket and scramble your brain. Marie would have been a vegetable for the rest of her life. We don't know that for sure. The consent form was for electroshock therapy, not a lobotomy. And even if that was the plan, Dad should have fought it legally, hired a lawyer, gotten her a different doctor, transferred her to a different facility. There were options besides kidnap. Easy to say now, 43 years later, but in 1982, in a working-class neighborhood, a steel mill worker, hiring lawyers to fight the psychiatric establishment, that wasn't realistic. So his only option was to hide her in the basement, and then leave her to die in the woods. Danny was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm not defending what he did, I'm just saying I understand why he did it. He was desperate. He was scared. He made terrible decisions, but they came from a place of love. Marie didn't feel loved. I said, read her messages again. She said she was being held prisoner. She said she wanted to go home. She promised to be good, to take her medication, to do whatever they wanted if they just let her go. That's not someone who felt loved. That's someone who felt terrorized. Danny hung up shortly after that. We haven't spoken since. He's not ready to see our father as the complex, flawed, ultimately tragic figure he really was. Maybe he never will be. I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand my father's choices. I've read everything I can find about psychiatric treatment in the 1980s, about the abuses that happened in state mental hospitals, about families who fought to protect their loved ones from harmful interventions. The truth is, my father wasn't entirely wrong. Mayview State Hospital had a terrible reputation. There were documented cases of patient abuse, experimental treatments, deaths from negligence. Electroshock therapy, in the 1980s, was not the refined treatment it is today. It was often administered without proper anesthesia, without proper monitoring, causing memory loss, brain damage, and in some cases death. And lobotomies, though less common by 1982, were still being performed on treatment-resistant psychiatric patients. The procedure was brutal and often resulted in severe cognitive impairment, personality changes, and a permanent loss of the person the patient had been. My father had genuine reason to fear what the hospital might do to Marie. His protective instinct was not misplaced, but protection turned into control, rescue turned into imprisonment, love turned into something darker and more complicated. Because Marie didn't want to be saved, not that way. She'd rather have taken her chances with the hospital than spend 3 months locked in a basement. She said as much in her messages. I promise I'll take the medication, please let me go home. She was willing to accept whatever treatment the hospital prescribed, if it meant not being imprisoned by her brother. My father took that choice away from her. He decided he knew better than she did what was good for her. And that's where love became control. That's where protection became oppression. I've been seeing a therapist to help process all of this. Dr. Sarah Chen specializes in family trauma and complicated grief. She's been helping me work through my feelings about my father, my mother, and my own guilt over not knowing what was happening. You couldn't have known, she said during one session. You were deliberately kept in the dark. Your father went to great lengths to hide what he was doing. The locked basement door, the excuses about the furnace and the water heater, the nighttime food deliveries. He was careful. He was methodical. You weren't negligent. You were deceived. But there were signs, I insisted. The locked door, the plates of food, my mother's nervousness. If I'd paid more attention, Catherine, listen to what you're saying. You're describing suspicious behavior that would only be obvious in retrospect. At the time, with no reason to suspect your father of anything, these were minor oddities, easily explained. You can't hold yourself responsible for not connecting dots you didn't know were there. But Marie was family. I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, demanded to know why Dad was acting strange. Would that have helped? If you'd confronted your father, if you'd asked to see what was in the basement, what do you think would have happened? I thought about that. He would have lied, made up another excuse, refused to open the door. Exactly. Your father was committed to his course of action. He'd already decided that keeping Marie hidden was the right thing to do. Your suspicion wouldn't have changed that. It might have made him even more careful, even more secretive. The outcome would have been the same, but at least I would have tried. At least I would have done something. You did do something. You trusted your parents. You believed your father when he said Marie had run away. You participated in the search efforts. You grieved for her. You didn't do anything wrong, Catherine. You were a victim of this situation too. Your father lied to you for 43 years. He let you believe your aunt had run away when he knew exactly where she was. First in the basement, then dead in the woods. That's a betrayal. You're allowed to be angry about that. She was right. I was angry, furious actually, at my father for what he'd done, my mother for keeping the secret, at myself for not knowing, at the psychiatric system that had made my father so desperate he felt kidnapping was his only option, at the world for being so broken that tragedies like this could happen. But beneath the anger was something else, profound sadness for Marie, who'd spent her final months trapped and afraid, sadness for my father, who'd spent 33 years searching woods for a sister he'd loved enough to ruin his life for, sadness for my mother, who'd carried the weight of this secret until it killed her, sadness for the family we could have been if things had been different. Detective Walsh closed Marie's case officially in December. The official report concluded that Marie Mitchell had died in September 1982 of exposure and dehydration while suffering from complications of untreated mental illness and medication withdrawal. My father was listed as being responsible for her death, though no charges could be filed given that he'd been dead for 5 years. The report was made public. Local news outlets picked up the story. For a few weeks, it was a sensation. The twisted tale of a man who'd kidnapped his sister to save her from psychiatric treatment and ended up killing her instead. Reporters called me constantly, asking for interviews, wanting me to comment on what kind of man my father had been. I declined all of them except one, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, who'd covered Marie's original disappearance in 1982. Her name was Linda Morrison, and she was 72 years old now, retired but still sharp as ever. We met at a coffee shop near my house. I remember when Marie Mitchell disappeared, Linda said. It was my first major story as a crime reporter. I interviewed your father several times. He seemed devastated, genuinely heartbroken. I never suspected he was the one who'd taken her. No one suspected, I said. He was very convincing. I've been thinking about that, Linda said. About whether he was lying or whether he genuinely believed what he was telling me. When I asked him about Marie, he'd say things like, I hope she's somewhere safe, and I wish I could have protected her better. At the time I thought he was expressing regret, that he hadn't prevented her from running away. But now I wonder if he was expressing regret about how he'd tried to protect her by hiding her in his basement. I think he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. I've read his journal. He thought the hospital was going to destroy her brain. He thought he was saving her life. And did he save her life? No. She lived 3 more months and then died alone in the woods. He didn't save her. He just prolonged her suffering and made her death more tragic. Linda was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. Then she said, I've covered a lot of family tragedies over the years, abuse cases, murder-suicides, neglect situations, and there's usually a clear villain, someone acting out of cruelty or selfishness or malice. But this case is different. Your father wasn't cruel. He wasn't selfish. He genuinely thought he was helping. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. Maybe worse in a way, because it means that good people, loving people, can do terrible things when they're desperate and afraid. It means that being well-intentioned isn't enough. It means that love can lead to tragedy just as easily as hate can. Linda wrote a thoughtful, nuanced article about Marie's case. She didn't villainize my father, but she didn't excuse him either. She presented the facts, what he'd done, why he'd done it, how it had ended, and let readers draw their own conclusions. The comments section on the online version of the article was divided. Some people said, my father was a monster who'd tortured his sister. Others said he was a desperate man who'd made impossible choices in an impossible situation. Some blamed the psychiatric system for being so brutal that kidnapping seemed like a viable alternative. Others said, there's never an excuse for holding someone prisoner, regardless of your intention. I read all the comments, even though my therapist advised against it. I wanted to see how other people interpreted what had happened. I wanted to know if anyone else could make sense of it, because I certainly couldn't. One comment in particular stayed with me. It was from a woman who identified herself as a psychiatric nurse who'd worked at state hospitals in the 1980s. I worked at institutions like Mayview during this time period, she wrote. The treatments we used were often barbaric by today's standards. Electroshock therapy administered without proper safeguards, medication given in doses that would be considered dangerous now, physical restraints used for days at a time, solitary confinement as punishment for non-compliance. I witnessed things that haunt me to this day, but you know what? Even with all of that, even with the acknowledged abuses of the system, patients were still better off in psychiatric care than hidden in basements by well-meaning family members, because at least in the hospital, there was oversight, there were other staff members, medical records, protocols. If something went wrong, there were people who would notice, who would intervene. When you take someone out of the system entirely, when you hide them away where no one can see them, there's no safety net at all. That's what happened to Marie Mitchell. Her brother thought he was protecting her from the hospital. Instead, he isolated her completely, cut her off from all medical care, and created a situation where she died alone in the woods. because there was no one else watching out for her. The psychiatric system in the 1980s was deeply flawed, but it was still better than a locked basement. She was right, for all its flaws, for all the documented abuses. The hospital would have kept Marie alive. They would have monitored her health. If she'd had seizures from medication withdrawal, there would have been doctors there to treat her. If she'd wandered away from a hospital, there would have been immediate search efforts, security footage, witnesses who'd seen which direction she went. Instead, she'd been alone in a cabin in the woods, confused and disoriented, and when she'd wandered off, there was no one to notice, no one to search, no one to save her. My father's protection had meant her death. I visit Marie's grave every Sunday now. It's in the same cemetery where my parents are buried, though I made sure to place her on the opposite side of the grounds. They don't deserve to be near her, even in death. Her headstone is simple. Marie Patricia Mitchell, lost but not forgotten. May she finally find peace. I bring her flowers every week. Sometimes I talk to her, tell her I'm sorry it took so long to find her, that I wish I'd known what was happening, that she deserved so much better than what she got. Last Sunday I noticed someone else had left flowers at her grave, white lilies, fresh and expensive. There was no card, no indication of who'd left them. I called the cemetery office and asked if they had records of who'd been visiting Marie's grave. The administrator checked their security footage and found something surprising. A man visits every Thursday afternoon, she told me. He's been coming since the burial. He's elderly, maybe late 70s or early 80s. He always brings white lily. He stays for about an hour sitting by the grave. We can send you a screenshot of the footage if you want to identify him. She emailed me the image. The man was thin, gray-haired, wearing a simple jacket and carrying a cane. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. I decided to go to the cemetery the following Thursday to see if he showed up. He arrived at 2 p.m., right on schedule. I watched from a distance as he made his way slowly to Marie's grave, leaning heavily on his cane. He placed the white lilies carefully in the vase by her headstone, then sat down on the bench nearby. I approached carefully, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I'm Catherine Anderson. Marie was my aunt." He looked up, and I saw his eyes were red from crying. "I know who you are," he said. "You look like your mother. Did you know Marie? I was her doctor at Mayview. My name is Gerald Morrison. I was her primary psychiatrist." Dr. Morrison, the doctor who'd recommended electroshock therapy. The doctor my father had been trying to save Marie from. I sat down on the bench next to him. "Why are you here?" "Guilt," he said simply. "I've been carrying it for 43 years. When Marie disappeared from the hospital, I knew something was wrong. Patients don't just walk away during outdoor recreation time without someone noticing. There were staff members, security, protocols, but the hospital administration didn't want to investigate too carefully. Psychiatric patients went missing sometimes. Usually they turned up eventually. The administrators said it would be bad publicity to make a big deal out of it, so they did a minimal search and then moved on. But you didn't move on." How could I? I'd been treating Marie for over a year. I knew she was paranoid, that she didn't trust authority figures, that she'd talked about escaping. But I also knew she didn't have the capacity to plan and execute an escape on her own. Someone helped her, and I always suspected it was her brother. My father. Yes. Robert Mitchell came to see me several times in the weeks before Marie disappeared. He was agitated, angry. He demanded to know what treatments we were planning. When I told him we were considering electroconvulsive therapy, he became furious, said we were going to kill her, said he'd never allow it. I tried to explain that ECT, when properly administered, is a safe and effective treatment for treatment-resistant psychiatric conditions. But he didn't believe me. He said he'd rather take Marie out of the hospital than let us fry her brain. So you knew he'd taken her? I suspected, but I had no proof, and when I mentioned my suspicions to the hospital administration, they told me to drop it. They said accusing a patient's family member of kidnapping without evidence would open them up to a lawsuit, so I dropped it. I let it go. And Marie died because of that. You couldn't have known she'd die. I knew she was off her medication. I knew withdrawal could cause complications. I knew she needed supervised medical care. If I'd pushed harder, if I'd insisted the police investigate Robert Mitchell more thoroughly, they might have found her before it was too late. But I was worried about my career, about getting the hospital in trouble. So I stayed quiet and Marie paid the price. We sat in silence for a while, two people carrying guilt for a tragedy neither of us had caused, but both of us felt responsible for. The electroshock therapy, I said finally. Would it have helped her? Dr. Morrison sighed. I don't know, maybe. ECT can be very effective for certain types of treatment-resistant psychiatric conditions, but it's not without risks, especially as it was practiced in the 1980s. Marie might have improved, or she might have experienced memory loss, confusion, cognitive impairment, or the treatment might have done nothing at all. I'll never know because we never got the chance to try. My father thought he was saving her from torture. I know, and I understand why he thought that. The reputation of psychiatric hospitals in that era was terrible. There were horror stories in the media about abuses, about patients being mistreated. Some of those stories were true. I won't defend everything that happened in places like Mayview, but your father didn't understand the difference between the extreme cases that made headlines and the routine care that most patients received. He saw the worst case scenarios and assumed that's what would happen to Marie. He didn't trust us to do right by her, so he took her, and in trying to save her from one fate, he condemned her to a worse one. Did you ever tell the police about your suspicions after Marie's body was found? Yes, Detective Walsh interviewed me several weeks ago. I told her everything I just told you. She said my testimony would have been helpful 43 years ago, but now it's just confirmation of what they'd already figured out from the journal and the basement messages. Do you think my father should have been charged with a crime if he were still alive? Dr. Morrison thought about that for a long time. Yes and no. What he did was illegal. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, possibly negligent homicide given that she died as a result of his actions. Legally, he should have faced consequences. But morally, I have more sympathy for him now than I did when Marie first disappeared. He was a working-class man with limited education, trying to protect his sister from a psychiatric system that he genuinely believed would harm her. He made terrible choices, but they came from a place of love and fear, not malice. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that Marie deserved better than she got from all of us. From me, from your father, from the hospital system, from society as a whole. Dr. Morrison stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. I come here every week to apologize to her, to tell her I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to find her. I don't know if she can hear me. I don't know if it matters, but I need to do it anyway. For 43 years, I've been living with the knowledge that I failed her. This is the only thing I can do now to make amends. He walked away slowly, leaving me alone at Marie's grave. I understood exactly how he felt. It's been 4 months now since the basement wall was discovered. 4 months since I learned the truth about what happened to Aunt Marie. 4 months of therapy, sleepless nights, difficult conversations, and unanswerable questions. I still don't know how to feel about my father. Some days I'm angry at him for what he did. Other days I feel profound sadness for how much he must have suffered, searching those woods every weekend for decades, knowing he was responsible for Marie's death, but unable to admit it, unable to make it right. My mother is harder to forgive. She had options my father did. She could have called the police anonymously. She could have left a note for authorities. She could have done something, anything to help Marie. Instead, she chose to protect her husband and keep the secret. She chose her marriage over her sister-in-law's life. Or maybe that's too harsh. Maybe she was genuinely afraid of my father. Maybe she thought if she told anyone, she'd be implicated too. Maybe she was trapped in her own way, just like Marie was trapped in the basement. I'll never know. Both of my parents took their secrets to their graves, and I'm left trying to make sense of what they left behind. The house on Oakwood Drive sold for $95,000, $10,000 more than the asking price. Mark and Jennifer Harrison have made it into a beautiful family home. Their daughter is 6 months old now, happy and healthy, growing up in a house with a complicated history. Jennifer sends me updates occasionally, photos of the baby, stories about the neighborhood, gratitude for selling them such a solid house. She doesn't mention the basement wall anymore, though I know the preserved messages are still there, protected behind plexiglass, a permanent reminder of what happened in that space. I'm grateful they kept the messages visible. They're a testament to Marie's existence, proof that she was real, that she suffered, that she mattered. For too long she was just a name on a missing persons report, a mystery that was never solved. Now her story is known, the truth is out. She's been found, laid to rest, and finally given peace. But the truth hasn't brought me peace. If anything, it's made everything more complicated, because the truth is messy and uncomfortable and doesn't fit into neat categories of right and wrong, good and evil, victim and villain. My father was trying to protect his sister. He was also holding her prisoner. The hospital was providing psychiatric treatment. They were also using methods that were often cruel and sometimes dangerous. My mother was a victim of domestic intimidation. She was also complicit in a serious crime. Marie was mentally ill and needed help. She was also a person with rights, who should have been allowed to make her own choices about treatment. All of these things can be true at the same time. That's what makes this so hard to process. There's no simple narrative, no clear hero or villain, no obvious lesson to take away, except maybe this: that love without respect is not really love. That protection without consent is just control. That good intentions without wisdom can lead to tragedy. My father loved Marie. I believe that, but he didn't respect her enough to let her make her own choices. He thought he knew better than she did what was good for her. And that certainty, that conviction that he alone was right, led to her death. I think about that a lot now when I'm making decisions for my own adult children. When my daughter calls asking for advice, I remember Marie and I bite my tongue. I offer suggestions instead of directives. I ask, what do you think, instead of here's what you should do. Because I learned from my father's mistake. I learned that the people we love are not ours to control, even when we're trying to protect them, especially when we're trying to protect them. Marie carved her message into that basement wall, hoping someone would find it, hoping someone would help her. It took 43 years, but someone finally did. The message was found. Her story was told. She was rescued. Even if that rescue came too late, I think she'd want me to share her story, to make sure people know what happened to her, to make sure no one else suffers the same fate, imprisoned by someone who claims to be protecting them, hidden away where no one can help them, dying alone because love turned into control. So I'm sharing it now. Marie's story, my father's story, my family's darkest secret. If you're watching this and you know someone who's being protected against their will, who's being isolated for their own good, who's being controlled by someone who claims to love them, please help them. Please speak up. Please don't let love be used as an excuse for imprisonment. And if you're someone who's trying to protect a loved one from danger, please remember Marie. Remember that protection without consent is not protection at all. Remember that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is step back and let people make their own choices, even when you disagree with those choices, even when you're afraid of the consequences. Marie deserved that. She deserved to be heard, to be respected, to make her own decisions about her treatment and her life. My father took that chance away from her because he thought he knew better. He didn't, and Marie died because of it. I visit her grave every Sunday. I bring white lilies, just like Dr. Marieson brings on Thursdays. I sit on the bench and talk to her about everything, about my week, about my grandchildren, about the weather, ordinary things, the kind of conversations we would have had if she'd lived, if she'd been free, if she'd been allowed to grow old with the rest of us. Sometimes I imagine what her life could have been. Maybe she would have found the right medication eventually, learned to manage her illness, lived independently. Maybe she would have married, had children of her own. Maybe she would have pursued her dream of working with animals. Maybe she would have become a grandmother, like me, spending her Sundays with family, instead of lying alone in the ground. But that's all fantasy. The reality is that Marie died at 34 years old, confused and afraid, wandering through woods she didn't recognize, dying of exposure, because the person who claimed to be saving her had abandoned her in the wilderness. The reality is that my father spent 33 years searching for her body, knowing he was responsible for her death, but unable to admit it to anyone, not even to himself. The reality is that my mother lived with this secret every day, carrying the weight of it, until it probably contributed to her death. The reality is that I lived my whole life, not knowing that my aunt was murdered, because that's what it was, really, even if it was never prosecuted as such. Murder by negligence, murder by good intentions, murder by love that became control, that became tragedy. I'm 68 years old. I sold my childhood home and discovered a nightmare hidden in its walls. I learned that the father I thought I knew was capable of terrible things. I learned that secrets have a way of coming out, eventually, no matter how carefully they're hidden. And I learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is someone who loves you enough to take away your Marie's message was carved in concrete, painted over repeatedly, hidden for 43 years, but it survived. The truth survived, and now her story is told. May she finally rest in peace, and may we all learn from her tragedy. God bless you all. And if there's someone in your life who's being protected against their will, please help them. Speak up. Don't let love be used as an excuse for control. Don't let good intentions lead to another tragedy, like Marie's. Because the basement walls remember, the truth always comes out, and by then it's usually too late.